Thank you. So thank you, everyone. And we're going to be covering all about the wonders of carbon reporting. So I'm Mark Butcher from Positive, and if anyone knows me, you'll know I'm mildly obsessed about the subject. I do rant about it quite a lot. And we've got a fantastic panel today. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves when we start our kind of first questions. But we've got Neil from TPXImpact, Noah from Advanced Infrastructure, Marientina from NTT, and Louise from Carbon Net Neutral. So I have to confess, in one of the last sessions, I was mildly triggered by some of the comments that came across. And again, the people who know me will know why. There is a general theme in digital and IT that reporting is kind of sorted in many ways. The actual truth is a country mile away, and there is an awful lot of misinformation out there generally in the market. And the one comment that really got me is this assumption that cloud is somehow virtuous and more sustainable than on-premise or co-located IT. And the reason it triggers me is, how do we know that when we're not actually measuring anything? When we're not measuring, when we're not reporting, when we're not actually doing anything. So how do we actually know that? And that's, I think, some of the discussions that we're going to be having today is kind of covering that. So I'll start with first question, we'll go to Noah, which is, why should companies be taking carbon reporting seriously anyway?
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Noah Miller, the Head of Data at Advanced Infrastructure, and we look at granular carbon intensity data, so carbon emissions from electricity. To answer why we should be taking this seriously, I break it down into 3 brief points. The first one is we are all going to have to very soon. We've spent most of this morning talking about regulation. Regulation is becoming more stringent, whether it's the CSRD, the SEC requirements, the GHG protocol requirements that are being updated, lots and lots of terrible acronyms. We're going to have to. So if you do it now, you'll be where you should be, as opposed to waiting until you have to catch up. The second part of that is that it's good business. It's starting to be valued as sustainability in its own right, particularly in the data center world. If you look at market leaders like Google, who we heard about last time, like Iron Mountain, for example, this is making a real difference. And it's making a real difference not just here, but also when you have a sustainability consultant who comes in, one of the first things they say is, oh, we'll switch you to cloud, to a more sustainable cloud infrastructure. And in the past, doesn't matter, right? Because the sustainability was a subset of marketing and it had no sway. Sustainability is starting to be a board level decision. And so this is becoming more and more important and a bigger seat at the table. And the third point is the environmental point. And I won't go into details because everyone knows the details. I'll give an analogy which is not mine, but I love. We're all sitting in a bath and someone's peeing. So why should we do something about it? Because it's a really bad situation and we're all in it together. So that's what I'd say. So
I have never heard that analogy. I might use it again if you don't mind.
Please do. Everyone take it and propagate it. I heard it at another conference.
I would definitely be stealing it. So on that same question, Neil, what's your view?
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Neil Clark. I work for TPXImpact, so a pretty classic consulting organisation. I've got a bit of a split role actually there. So I am our planet officer, which basically means I own the strategy related to anything around measuring, reducing, removing our footprint, and also our employee benefit, how we work, who we work with, all of that kind of stuff. And then the second part of my role is pretty classic consulting stuff, with mainly centered around digital transformation and websites. And what's great is I get to talk about low carbon websites quite a bit now with a lot of our clients. So that the two roles are starting to cross over a bit, which is great. Yeah, and just to, I guess, add to Noah's point, I think the first thing is it's just morally the right thing to do. Any company needs to know what impact or what part it is playing in the climate emergency, and I think it's really important that they do that. And I think the more that you measure, the more that a company educates itself and really understands the problems that are embedded in our society and embedded in the way that we do business. So I think it's morally the right thing to do for that reason. And then secondly, it's, very similar, I guess, to sort of Noah's points, but really it's about justifying the investments that you're going to make in your reduction strategies. So from a stakeholder perspective, stakeholders like investors, like clients, like legislators, they're interested in two things. They're interested in where is a company trying to get to in terms of its emissions? So what is it trying to reduce to is the first thing it's interested in. And then the second one is, what is the credible plan for getting there? And the credible plan bit isn't possible without measurement. And we are, I think, from a business perspective, there's obviously some companies that are doing a great job in terms of measuring emissions and having reduction strategies, but it's not a part of everyday business in the same way that a talent strategy would be or a sales strategy would be. So sustainability and reduction strategies are sort of on the back foot because they're not everyday business yet. So having a really solid measurement to sort of allow those sustainability and reduction strategies to be on a level playing field with all other types of strategies, I think is really, really important. And I think to enable sustainability managers and other people who own these reduction strategies, I think it's really important that measurement is there and company invests in proper measurement to give that person or those people the best chance to have the biggest impact.
Thank you. And I think from my perspective, I think most companies have a net zero target. And I would really question the validity of that when they have a net zero target, but they don't often have a net zero plan. And they don't have a net zero plan because they don't have any they don't have any accurate carbon data they can meaningfully use. So one of the challenges that we see often is you can't actually improve anything you're not measuring. So how have you got a target, particularly organisations that I see which have, say, a net zero target by 2030? But they don't actually have any data that they're using to measure this by, to measure any improvements. Which sort of comes on to the next question, which is, what are the common issues with counting and reporting your digital carbon footprint? So let's start with Louise, let's start with you.
So I've already been on, so I won't introduce myself again, but I just want to talk a little bit about carbon. So carbon can be split into two basic forms. One is embodied and run. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol actually defines the calculation and methodology for life cycle emissions and also reporting under scope 1, 2 and 3, which is an annual reporting cycle. Going in as a consultant, I see a lot of activity around reporting under scopes 1 and 2, but scope 3 is largely ignored, and also life cycle emissions aren't properly managed. They all require different calculations, different data, and unless you're properly set up and you understand the technicality of carbon accounting, because it is a technical subject, it's not just a question of getting your electricity bills and timesing it by a carbon factor. And some of the carbon factors I've seen just on scope 1 and 2 have been really dodgy without taking into account the location or production source of that energy. So I think we're missing actually this, it's not necessarily a desire, I guess it's an understanding of the complexities of how you actually address scope 3, and also making sure that we're not using things like spend-based analysis or spend-based carbon predictions, which frankly aren't worth the paper they're written on and should be avoided at all cost, unless you want to be fined or end up in court. But we need to tackle scope 3, and we need to make sure that we've got data collection going on, particularly with our supply chain, and then there's engagement with the supply chain. We also need to make sure it's not a tick box exercise, which is what I'm also seeing. Once a year activity where we produce a load of carbon reports and stick them out into an annual report. That's not how we're going to actually reduce carbon. We need to make sure that we're using that data in a meaningful way, and we're using it at the point where we're making decisions, not at the end of the year as a reporting cycle.
Okay. Hi, hello, everyone. I was also introduced before, but actually something that I would like to mention is that for us, for our net zero commitment and strategy, reporting is one of our key work streams, in the sense that greenhouse gas accounting is really important if we're not able to account for the impact of our decarbonization interventions, whether that is around efficiency or renewables or tackling embodied carbon, then if we're not able to quantify that impact, then we're not able to communicate it, and it is as if it hasn't happened. So when it comes to, let's say, issues around greenhouse gas accounting, for us, they're really around two things. So the one is availability of data, and the other one is the quality. In many ways, I will I agree with what Louise said before about the information that can be collected. For example, when it comes to availability, there is a part of internal stakeholder engagement, which is not to be taken for granted. But also at the same time, when it comes to information that is for our value, from our value chain, for our Scope 3 emissions, the importance of working with our suppliers for addressing our mutual footprint as much as with our clients cannot be overlooked. At the same time, when it comes to quality, so it is true, and we understand that you cannot get from not reporting much to having a perfect footprint. Greenhouse gas accounting is a journey that is based on building knowledge and further refining, and everyone needs to start from somewhere. So for us, really, what we would actually say to an organization that right now they're not doing anything is think what is the first thing that you can do in order to be able to report something, and then based on that you can improve and improve. And if that is, starting with spend data, so be it, but please understand that with spend data you're not actually able to report reductions that come from your decarbonization initiatives. So that's actually an important point to take into account. So for us, right now, given that we are now going through the first time that we're having external assurance, which is, a very granular exercise, and it has been helping us to identify, to be happy for what we have been doing well, but also to reflect a lot about what we need to be doing better. So the role of external validation is a key driver when it comes to improvement. It is, again, something to note is that one needs to start from somewhere. There are not going to be perfect solutions in the beginning, and it is a continuous process of improvement and further refinement in order to get more and more granular for being in a position to meet the reporting requirements from investors, clients, and regulators, and all external and also internal stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you. So, and I think from the context of that we see quite often is, in IT we've had a bit of a minor obsession with energy being the source of all emissions, and we have willfully ignored Scope 3 for far too long. And it's one of the things that people often miss is why does that matter? Why is that an important thing to even consider? And what I always do is I'll always pull up an ESG report from, say, a big tech vendor, because they're great examples. So if I was to pull up an ESG report from, say, Microsoft, and you wonder why reporting on Scope 3 is so important, if you look at their stats, you'll find that 98.3% of their total emissions fall into their Scope 3. Mm-hmm. So actually, you could make everything as efficient as you possibly could be from an energy consumption perspective, and you're literally fiddling whilst Rome burns. You're not even scratching the edge. You can make a 50% reduction in it, and you've only moved the needle in your total emissions by 0.5%. So that's why it's kind of quite important. And that comes back to the accuracy kind of reporting. And as you can see, technology's failed me.
Just to come in on that briefly, the Scope 3 is a massive problem, but particularly within data centers, we actually have an opportunity in that Scope 2 is also a massive part of your emissions. Microsoft as a vendor, their Scope 3 dwarfs anything. And so why are they going to spend lots of time thinking about Scope 2? But as a data center provider and operator, we're in a fairly unique position where Scope 2 is actually a pretty big part of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And so And it's also, through a variety of ways we'll talk about later, an area where there is real meaningful actions that you can make to reduce your Scope 2 emissions, which then feeds into the supply chain Scope 3 emissions of all your customers. So if you can both reduce your own emissions and sell to your customers that you're reducing their Scope 3 emissions, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, that's a double win and a real opportunity, in my opinion.
Okay, that's a very good point. So, which does also come on to one of the questions, which is, some people say that using renewable energy means your emissions are zero anyway. So what's the problem with ID when you say that? So no, let's come back to you on that one then.
So there are two big problems with the 100% renewable, and that's how you get to that number. The two problems are unbundled guarantees of origin, REGOs, certificates, GOs, depending on where you are in the country. I think I'm becoming the analogy guy today, but I was sitting at a table with 3 vegans having dinner, and I had a large steak. And by the certificate methodology, I can pay one of them to say they ate the steak, and I was a vegan and doing my bit for the environment. The second problem with the 100% renewables is the offsets. So even if I do take my full share of steak, offsets are a particularly murky market. Oh, what the hell, one more analogy. This is another one that's not mine, but I think is really great. I'm in a relationship, and I was unfaithful, but I'm going to pay someone else to be faithful, and so I've offset my faithfulness, right? It's ridiculous, and there's also no way of verifying that they are faithful. So there are better ways to do it, and more people are moving away from the 100% renewables. In Ireland, the Advertising Standards Agency have recently said you can't do it. In the UK, several energy providers are, several utilities are fairly vocal now that that's not how they're going to do it. OVO just recalled their 100% tariff. And so the idea that Scope 2 is sorted and done is very easy and simple, but it's just not true. And accepting that is the first step to then making it better.
Thank you. So, Neil, what's your view on that?
I think it comes, I don't know, there's stuff written down about market-based versus location-based electricity, but you know but I think it comes back down to that education point again. So the more that you measure and the deeper you go into where the emissions are coming from your companies, the more interesting stuff you will find out. So buying certificates annually in a country which is potentially hundreds of miles away is not a great way to offset, you know, in a word, the emissions of a data center. But I think when you look at what certain hyperscale data center companies are doing and some smaller data center companies are doing now, is starting to look at, okay, what's actually happening in 15-minute periods or 30 minutes or 60-minute periods, and then matching at that point. So that is starting again to head in the right direction, and they're doing that on the grid in which they operate rather than in other countries. So the deliverability, that's a word, of those of that electricity is a bit more genuine to the particular data center. So I think that's probably a good way to view it. And then just quickly on the embodied carbon point as well, somebody's already mentioned Iron Mountain. It used to be formerly IT Renew. Like they're doing all of the brilliant stuff that they're doing around recovering servers and making them last a lot longer, refurbishing those, proving that they've got a huge amount of resilience and they can last longer than 12 months or 18 months, which might be when a data center rips out their servers and shreds them or recycles them. So, you know, the good rule of thumb, which I'm sure everyone here knows this, the carbon, the emissions which go into manufacturing something is about 80% of the life cycle emissions of a laptop or a phone or a server or anything electronic. 20%, broadly speaking, is like the electricity that is used to charge it and operate it. So it's key that we extend that 80% for as long a period as possible. And I think, yeah, again, coming back to the education point, I'm really thinking, how can we think differently? How can we do something which isn't the status quo? How can we work with other partners who are doing great stuff? That's the way that I think we need to be looking at it. And I think it makes it, the points that Noah's made and Louise and Marientina already as well around this subject, I think it makes it pretty obvious that if you're just doing annual certificates or even quarterly certificates for renewable energy, like your emissions are definitely more than zero without a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you. So we have one more question to finish off, and everyone's going to answer it, and it's quite an interesting one. So if we assume that we're all going to start measuring emissions and we're all going to start reporting them, the key thing is how can we actually make this information and reporting much more useful and practical, and what can we do with the data apart from just throw it in a report that no one's going to read? So let's start with Louise.
Oh, lots of stuff. I think the interesting thing, if you've committed to net zero, then you have to actively reduce carbon. And to actively reduce carbon, you've got to have knowledge at your fingertips when you're making decisions that impact carbon usage. One of the things that I did in my last company is we brought forward all of our carbon accounting to the design phase of the data center. We were then able to model the impact, swapping out the top 5 carbon emitters, and see what that would have as a sort of almost like a mini business case around carbon reduction of that site. Before we did that, we were running all of our carbon accounts at the end of the build cycle. I mean, seriously, why? It seemed illogical to me. That then prompted a few changes in the way we did marketing to clients. We were able to market eco options and other stuff that the clients would pay for, which increased the value of our build or our built environment. And we were also able to model change in the sites themselves. So that's looking at run emissions rather than embodied carbon. So what is the impact of putting a different type of cooling or creating the site or building the site slightly differently? I'm not an M&E person, I'm an IT person, but we just did the modelling to actually understand impact of change. And I think that's the important thing. When you look at carbon, you're having a new lens on your investment. It's not just about unit cost, it's about carbon impact. And we were certainly able to sell eco options to clients off the back of that basically providing detailed carbon emissions. But they weren't made up from spend-based data. They were component level carbon reports. Oh, sorry, microphone person. And I think that's the key thing, real-time data when you make decisions. The other thing I said earlier about exposing all of our electrical data to the clients so they could actually make informed decisions about moving workloads across site. Having been on the IT side, actually you don't bother shutting stuff down, you just leave it up. You have to be disciplined, and we know that if that's a cost-based argument rather than a carbon-based argument, developers don't do anything, right? If they see they're impacting the planet, they actually will start making sure that they're more responsible with their own compute. So I think carbon is a different lens. We can use it in different ways, but we need to be more sophisticated. It can't just be an annual report. The data has to be there when we need to make decisions.
I don't know what else to say after this response. But indeed, if you start measuring now emissions, first of all, congratulations, because you are working on transparency, establishing transparency, which is really important and not to be taken for granted. Then something that one should be doing is actually, it's not just a report, like read that report. What does it tell you? What does it tell us about our hotspots? What does it tell us about what kind of actions we need to implement? What can we do in order to plan these actions correctly, make that business case, engage with internal stakeholders when it comes to, from the aspect for collecting data to mobilizing resources. So yeah, there is an aspect about reporting that really helps with establishing transparency. There is also the part about it that is really going beyond reporting for reporting, which is reporting for taking action and decarbonization. And then there is something that has all the co-benefits that were also mentioned by Noah and Neil when it comes to awareness and education. So when an organization starts annually reporting emissions, they embark on an ongoing virtuous circle of driving engagement internally, also throughout their value chain, further confirming internal buy-in for the program with the leadership, but also building trust with external stakeholders as well. So yes, these are co-benefits of reporting that is going beyond the numbers that we have been experiencing and we see over the course of time becoming more and more obvious. Thanks.
Two great points. Moving the decision-making to before rather than after is massive, and you can only do that when you have reports that you trust and are detailed enough. I probably would focus on the data side of it, both your internal data and your external data. We discussed, in the previous panel, I was discussing kind of data collection is difficult. Absolutely, it's difficult. But I promise you, it's a lot easier than a lot of the other problems in other industries. Yeah. We, as data centers, there is a huge amount of power, water, energy data that is available, and it's available at high granularity, so use it. That would be my kind of fundamental. And then to go along with that, you need carbon intensity data and emission factors that are similarly granular. And there are lots of people doing that. We do it in the UK, but also the National Grid do it in the UK, and they do it for free. There is an API you can call to get a half-hourly carbon intensity of your electricity at any point in the country that's entirely free. There are other great organizations working worldwide. To name a few, please go look at them. Electricity Maps, What Time, Resurety, Energy Tag is working to make granular certificates, so certificates of electricity origins, more traceable and more actionable. FlexiDAO, BCOR, who we heard in our previous panel, people are doing this. You don't have to do it yourself. And then once you have all that data, then you get to do the really fun stuff, like load shifting, like demand profiling. Microsoft have shown you can reduce the emissions of compute jobs by up to 30% if you take into account your half-hourly carbon intensity. Google Cloud are very close to offering, not as a bespoke or a kind of extra service, but as a standard service, they will move your compute just around to data centers where the energy is cleaner. That's awesome. And that's only possible when you're using granular carbon data and granular energy data.
Yeah, thankfully there's 1 point left, I think. So I think for me, it's about open sourcing it. I think that's a really key bit. The Green Software Foundation have got their software carbon intensity metric, which they are trying to turn into an ISO at the moment, and there's lots of default data that backs that up. So anyone contributing to that is going to make that data better. So open sourcing it in that way, I think would be brilliant. Just, the annual reporting cycle tends to not have a lot of detail in it. There'll be a whole heap of working out that goes out and that is underneath that. Just open source the working out. I'm sure there's going to be CFOs and commercial officers who will be slightly cringing and thinking, God, that's all of our commercial. What's the word when you have intelligence? Thank you. Jeez, my brain today. Okay, thanks. That's all of my RIP. It was on the tip of my tongue, I promise. But I think we're in a position now where we should be trying to compete for the future together, not compete against each other for small gains. There was there's a shoe company called Allbirds who recently did a sort of joint venture with Adidas. And Allbirds look at like every single tiny bit of a shoe to see like how can we reduce the emissions of what we're doing, and where we're sourcing it from, how we're making it, where we're shipping it, all of that kind of stuff. And they open source all of that. And they did a tie-up with Adidas, and the CEO, a guy called Tim Brown, I think, said at the time, like, we're not competing, we don't want to compete with Adidas, we don't want to compete with other shoe companies, we just want to compete for the future. And that's what I feel is like a bit at the moment with the data and all of the working out that, we have so much within the IT industry and the data center industry that we're not sharing in an open source way. As academia in this area is gaining traction, and there's more of it, and there's more in-depth reporting, and there's more research that's being done. Like again, imagine being a company tying up with a university in order to release some of this great data. I think that shows true leadership and shows that a company is differentiated to others, and I think it's a great selling point in the long run.
And I think as well from the context of making it very, very, very brutal, like what you can actually use this data for is to save yourself an awful lot of money. And why I say this is really simple is that, so we did a survey a few months ago of developers to ask them what do they actually care about on optimization initiatives. Because almost every big enterprise has a FinOps team if they're in the cloud. They have a TBM team if they're running kind of on-premise, so technology business management. And they have optimization programs, and they have change programs, they have capacity management. But still, enterprise IT wastes about 50% of every single thing they buy. So there is a huge opportunity of sustainability inside IT as well as sustainability of IT. The inside bit is a responsibility of the people consuming the services. And we found that when developers were really honest, when they didn't feel under pressure and being exposed, it was 69% of them said they cared more about a carbon metric for driving optimization than they did a cost metric. The ones who cared about cost were only about 13%. So actually, by putting all these cost programs onto developers, because they care about delivering products, pipelines, they care about hitting a roadmap on minimal resources. So actually, if you want to save an awful lot of money, be more sustainable using the sustainability data, because it will save you an absolute fortune. We had one example with a telco about 18 months ago who saved £13 million in 1 year on their AWS bill just by not being stupid with a requirement. They just optimized it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Perfect timing. We have 1 minute left. So any quick question from the audience?
Yeah. Hi, Rolf Opperman with Cognovum. We do micro data centers. Do you think we need to talk to Uptime about the tiering and the rating of data centers and how that's incredibly carbon intensive in terms of tier 4 with diesel generator backups? And do you think there needs to be kind of a new way to think about it? Because that's driving a lot of the carbon intensity of the embodied, at least, and somewhat of the running. So.
You mean if we need a common guidance for that?
I mean,
right now you have to have the
so I think
You can
lots
have
of operators.
biofuel.
I think lots of operators are moving away from diesel backup generators, and I think the Uptime are doing a lot of work on sustainability. I don't know whether they're integrating sustainability as part of the tier certifications, but the resiliency levels at tier 4 do mean that it's harder to be sustainable than it would be at tier 1. But the applications ultimately supposedly need more resiliency.
I think there's a general, I know when I was speccing data centres in banking, tier 4 was what you expect. I mean, it just, that was a mandatory, and it was almost ingrained in you, even though actually you've got so many layers of redundancy now, the app layer, OS server everywhere is all the way down, up and down the stack. But you're completely right. That whole premise that we are over-engineering sites, promoted really by the Uptime Institute, and then financial services also heavily promoting that. I think we need a sea change, but if you look at the way the cloud providers are actually building their sites, they're not necessarily following that tier structure when they're speccing their own sites. So and the service they provide as a cloud for redundancy of a workload in a cloud will be based on availability as well. So they've assumed that the availability is coming from the software layer more than the physical layer. So I think that will change, but you're 100% right. That needs to be thought through again.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.